You're not here by accident. Something within you, subtle but deeply compelling, brought you to this video at precisely this moment. And by the time you reach the end, you'll understand why. This isn't just another random event in your life. It's a quiet signal from your inner world, a gentle push from your deeper self that's been guiding you without noise or spectacle. True personal growth doesn't arrive with loud announcements or dramatic change. It's not flashy or immediate. Instead, it's quiet and barely noticeable, a transformation that begins from within. It's not about reinventing yourself through external shifts. It's about letting go of what was never truly yours to begin with. It's about reconnecting with who you've always been at your core. Transformation of this kind doesn't announce itself, it whispers. It's the subtle realization that you no longer relate to the version of yourself you once held on to. You start feeling out of place in familiar spaces and conversations. Even the parts of you that once defined your identity begin to feel foreign. Carl Jung once said that spiritual development doesn't come from refining the personality. It comes from rising above it. It's about releasing what isn't essential. The illusions, the defenses, the armor. This process brings you back to the quiet, steady truth that has always been within you. One of the earliest signs of this change is how you relate to your personal history. What once seemed central to your identity now feels distant, like watching a film from another life. You remember it clearly, but it no longer defines you. There's no need to reject it, nor do you feel overly sentimental about it. You feel calm. You can now reflect on your past without explaining or justifying it. You stop retelling your story from a place of pain. You don't define yourself by what you endured or achieved. You recognize it all as part of your path, but you now understand, deeply and firmly, that your value isn't measured by those experiences. The past no longer has power over you, nor does it limit your future. And where guilt or pride once lived, something else begins to emerge. A quiet freedom. It allows you to view your past for what it is, the past. This emotional clarity isn't detachment, it's integration. You don't need others to understand your pain anymore. You're no longer searching for validation or compelled to explain yourself. You found peace in your silence, and that's enough. You begin to see that the things which once triggered you now pass through you. Words that once hurt now dissolve before they sink in. Relationships that held you in outdated roles begin to loosen, not because you reject them, but because there's nothing left in you for them to grasp. As you move beyond the old self, your emotions stop running the show. It's not emotional disconnection, it's awareness. You learn to tell the difference between your present reactions and old, familiar patterns. Your internal narrative begins to shift. The thoughts that once helped you survive are no longer on repeat. You're no longer seeking redemption, nor are you punishing yourself for who you were. You observe and continue forward, as if a quiet part of you knows that every step led you to this one. This awareness doesn't come from the mind, but from the soul. And it's through this soul-level knowing that the old self begins to fade, not because it disappears, but because you no longer live there. You don't forget your past, but you no longer build your identity on it. Your choices begin to stem from clarity and alignment, rather than from the story you used to tell. The self-definitions that once felt solid, this is who I am or I can't change, start to soften, not through struggle, but because they no longer fit who you're becoming. You no longer act from a need to protect your image. You realize your soul doesn't require labels to feel real. Transcending the old self doesn't mean erasing it. It means honoring it and moving forward without dragging along what no longer serves you. You stop holding on to the roles you created just to survive. You no longer feel the need to repeat the same emotional cycles or shrink yourself to fit into spaces you've outgrown. And the gentleness with which you let go, the ease without resistance, signals that you're no longer operating from a conditioned self. You're beginning to live from your authentic self, the self that doesn't need to prove or defend, the self that simply exists. Then something else shifts, how you connect with others, not because you tried to change, but because something changed within. You start to relate from a place that is clearer, more honest and unburdened. You stop seeking from others what you've learned to give yourself. You don't look for rescue. You don't need constant validation to feel real. Your presence is no longer something you negotiate out of fear of being alone. In the past, your relationships may have been built on unspoken needs or emotional agreements formed in pain. Now, there is space. Space to pause, space to reflect before reacting, space to witness without taking everything in. When you rise above the old patterns, your emotional decisions change. Not because the world is different, but because you are. Your sensitivity no longer steers you blindly. Your generosity no longer comes from emptiness, but from balance. And that shifts everything. Your relationships stop echoing your sense of lack and instead reflect your wholeness. You no longer seek conversation just to avoid silence or intimacy to escape yourself. Now you can share from fullness, not from need. This is the heart of genuine transformation, when you no longer feel the need to be anything other than yourself. When your history doesn't define you. When your feelings inform you but don't control you, when your story becomes memory instead of identity, that's when you start to remember who you really are. Even if someone no longer aligns with you, there's no drama, no resentment, no emotional collapse, because your stability no longer depends on someone else staying. You no longer hand over your peace to others. And this quiet, often invisible shift changes everything. As you begin to embody emotional independence, you uncover a kind of freedom that is both liberating and grounding. You're no longer running, you're no longer clinging, you're simply present. And that is enough. Your presence, once something background, becomes your new way of loving. A love that doesn't beg, doesn't chase, doesn't seek validation through performance. It simply exists, steady, sincere, and calm. This kind of love doesn't scream through promises or dramatic displays. It's genuine, not because it's trying to prove anything, but because it doesn't need to. You connect through truth, not performance. You no longer give your time and energy to empty conversations or relationships that persist only out of habit. Your energy, now more refined, naturally filters out what no longer fits. And while that may sting, it also brings relief. It brings clarity. Your former self chose from fear, from urgency, from the desperation to be accepted. But now you don't choose from that place anymore, because you've made peace with silence. You've learned to welcome it. You know now. The company of someone who doesn't truly see you is lonelier than your own solitude. So, you begin to stay true to yourself, even if that means stepping away from what you once believed was love. You stop mistaking emotional intensity for authenticity and drama for meaningful depth. You start to notice that peace comes from what is grounded, while anything that requires constant friction to stay alive often masks emotional disconnection. You no longer try to force clarity. There's no urge to prove your growth or justify why. Certain environments no longer feel right. The energy you radiate just by being genuine starts to speak louder than anything you could say. Without intending to, it stirs responses in people who haven't yet reached this stage themselves. Some may drift away, others may move closer, but from a place of honesty, not dependence. And you're okay with both, because your center is no longer shaped by your relationships, it now shapes them. In this new alignment, whatever remains in your life does so because it truly connects, not because it's being held in place. This shift in how you relate to others quietly transforms your whole reality. What once seemed indispensable now fades softly. This isn't rejection, it's clarity. clarity that comes from deeply understanding your own shadows, so you no longer cast them onto others. Your former self sought reflections, people who could validate your worth, who could fill emotional voids with partial presence and fleeting comfort, but you no longer seek that kind of connection. You've realized that real connection doesn't deplete you, it expands you. It doesn't require you to suppress your essence. It encourages you to live it fully. And from this renewed place of energy, everything begins to shift. Your relationships become lighter, more sincere, and less entangled. Strength no longer comes from intensity, but from resonance, in that quiet space where two people can simply coexist, without needing explanations or rescue, without holding on too tightly. In this space, boundaries arise, not from fear, but from self-respect. These boundaries don't create distance, they bring structure, they safeguard your time, your energy, your inner world. You stop exhausting yourself, trying to sustain what isn't evolving with you. You don't stay out of fear of losing what little remains. You've moved into a higher vibration, one that no longer feels the need to apologize for growth. You no longer seek permission to follow your truth, and that alone proves your former self is no longer leading the way. Now, your soul does. And your soul chooses only what nourishes, uplifts and reflects your truest self. From here, you come to see the real purpose of companionship, not to complete you, but to share in who you've already become. You don't seek refuge in others anymore, because you've become your own safe space. This emotional self-reliance isn't isolation, it's maturity at the soul level. You no longer carry feelings that aren't yours. You stop absorbing the pain that others won't take responsibility for. You let go of the urge to heal those who haven't chosen healing for themselves. You leave behind the patterns where you once tried to be enough by becoming less of who you are. Now you know that real love doesn't disguise itself as sacrifice. It's about being present without pressure, connecting without constraint. And it's in this clear and simple connection that the most powerful changes begin to unfold. You become a mirror of growth for others, not because you try to guide them, but because your energy naturally speaks to them. Just your presence, in a state of inner alignment, reveals the truths they've long kept hidden. Some will embrace this, others may resist it. Either way, you remain at peace. Because now your connections are born not from obligation, but from freedom, the freedom of being truly yourself. And in this space, something important becomes clear. The deepest, most meaningful bonds aren't the ones with the grandest promises. They're the ones that honor each other's evolution. That level of connection can only form after you've gone through your own transformation. You've met your former self, accepted it, and gently let it go, not out of rejection, but understanding. You see now that your past self wasn't wrong. It was simply protecting you the best way it knew how, but you no longer need that kind of protection. You don't need to perform or wear masks to feel worthy. You've stopped chasing acceptance. You just are, and that's enough. Without effort, without seeking validation, your essence now shines more clearly than ever. And in that clarity, you discover a deeper kind of intimacy. It's not about exposing every wound or narrating every detail of your journey. It's about allowing yourself to be seen, fully, simply, just as you are. The weight of your old personas has lifted. It no longer hurts to be misunderstood or overlooked. Because your value no longer depends on anyone else's perception, it lives in the bond you've built with yourself. This connection with yourself was born in quiet moments, in solitude, in the times you chose not to fall back into old patterns, in the days you held yourself together, even when there was nothing else to hold on to. From that root, your old self fades, not because you reject it, but because it doesn't match your current frequency anymore. You can now look back at it with respect, as a part of your journey that did the best it could with what it knew. But you're no longer surviving. you're creating. And in that space of conscious creation, there's no room left for the rigid structures of your past. Now there's room for softness, for nuance, for what resonates without needing to shout. Your soul doesn't need to impress or defend its light. It just lives in it. And from that place, every relationship that remains or enters your life reflects this new way of being. Love is no longer a burden. It's a support. Sharing no longer comes from emptiness, but from wholeness. Choosing people or experiences isn't about attachment, it's about alignment with who you've become. Your entire perspective shifts in a way that can't be reversed. You stop viewing life through the same lens. What once felt unfair now reveals a broader meaning. What once looked like failure now becomes an essential part of your growth. You don't speak to yourself as a victim anymore. You see that even your pain had a purpose, one that was bigger than the suffering itself. Transcending your old self doesn't just mean healing, it means seeing from a clearer perspective. Not because it makes you feel better, but because your soul simply can't see things the old way anymore. You've grown internally. And with that growth comes the ability to recognize former chaos as hidden wisdom, as quiet guidance wrapped in discomfort. Even your experience of time evolves. You no longer wait anxiously. You don't chase what's leaving, and you don't demand that everything unfold immediately. You live in step with your soul's rhythm, a rhythm not pressured by outside demands, but led by inner wisdom. From this new rhythm, your life flows differently. Priorities shift. What once seemed vital fades, and what used to go unnoticed now feels sacred. You come to appreciate stillness. You value the pause. You trust the unfolding, even when not every piece makes sense. You stop needing guarantees to take a step forward. You only need to feel aligned, and that's enough. Because now, you know your soul doesn't need to figure everything out to keep moving. It only needs to stay connected to what feels true. And that truth becomes your internal compass. You no longer decide out of fear. You stop reacting to old wounds or striving to meet expectations that were never truly yours. They're quiet acts, small acknowledgements of your present. And this simple yet powerful shift transforms how you experience life. You stop forcing meaning from every situation. You've come to understand that real clarity often arrives only once you've let go. With this level of inner maturity, you no longer try to control everything. You let go of the urge to demand immediate answers. You begin to live with more gentleness, and that gentleness isn't weakness, it's quiet strength. Your power becomes inward, steady, and grounded. You no longer feel a need to broadcast your journey or prove your growth. Your most honest moments of silence begin to say more than words ever could. This shift changes how you move through the world. Your awareness deepens. The smallest gestures, the quiet moments, the in-between spaces begin to matter. You're no longer chasing achievements or measuring progress through what others can see. Now you measure growth by how you feel when you wake up, by the calm you carry when alone, by the peace that remains even when the world moves fast around you. Transcending the old self means releasing the narrow identity you once held. It means living from a higher perspective without disconnecting from your reality. You remain grounded but attuned to a different rhythm, a deeper frequency. It's not about reacting anymore. It's about consciously choosing how to experience life. This conscious choice is where transformation begins. It reshapes your relationship with everything. What once felt like a burden may now become an invitation to be fully present. What once drained you now quietly fades away without resistance or resentment. And while this shift might not be obvious to others, it is profound, lasting, and real. You no longer depend on your circumstances to find peace. That peace now comes from within, from how honestly you're living in line with your true self. This commitment to inner truth becomes non-negotiable. It centers you, anchors you, becomes your personal compass. Your former self looked for worth in accomplishments, praise, and outside approval. but you've stopped chasing that illusion. You've learned that fulfillment doesn't come with noise. It appears in quiet moments, in the rhythm of your breath, in the care with which you speak, in the quiet confidence with which you walk away from what no longer nourishes your spirit. Challenges no longer appear as punishments. You now see them as gateways, opportunities your soul must pass through to awaken dormant parts of you. You don't run anymore. You face them with the understanding that they're here to reveal, not destroy. This change touches your energy at its core. You no longer vibrate with fear or self-doubt. Instead, you radiate truth, unspoken yet clear in your presence, your stillness, your eyes. And in that stillness it becomes clear. The real transformation happened inside you. It wasn't about changing your surroundings. It was about seeing everything through the lens of an awakened self, no longer filtered by a need to fix, prove, or please. From this place, the everyday becomes sacred, not because the world has changed, but because your perception has. Your view softens, expands, and fills with quiet gratitude. You don't need signs to believe. You don't demand certainty to continue. You walk with a slower rhythm, not because you've slowed down, but because you've stopped chasing things that were never meant for you. You give yourself permission to choose differently, even if no one else understands. You allow yourself to not know, to not control, to leave space for mystery, because now you trust that life is working with you, not against you. And in that space, things begin to align, not through effort, but through ease. Your energy becomes a magnet, drawing in only what aligns with your evolved self. You no longer force or cling. What belongs stays, what doesn't fades, gently and without drama. Even when challenges arise, they feel different. They don't break you anymore, because you no longer meet them from a wounded place. You approach them with depth, with the willingness to understand rather than win. You meet life not with urgency, but with presence. You stop striving to become someone. Instead, you begin to embody who you truly are. And in that embodiment, everything shifts, not loudly, not all at once, but completely. And while others may not notice it, everything changes, because when your energy aligns with your truth, your world adjusts in response. No chaos, no struggle, just synchronicity, just clarity, just that quiet inner knowing, wordless but clear, reminding you of what you've always known deep down. You're not who you once were. You've transcended, and this transcendence doesn't need to be declared. It's felt. It lives in your presence. There's no dramatic turning point, no grand announcement. One day, you simply realize you no longer react the same way. What once hurt you now barely stirs you. You don't live under the weight of urgency anymore. You've changed, not just on the surface, but at your core. And that kind of change doesn't need to be labeled to be real. You feel it in how you show up, in how you choose peace over performance, in your comfort with silence, in your trust in uncertainty, in your devotion to what matters. Your energy no longer scatters. It aligns, it focuses, it flows, not from pressure, but from an inner source that needs no name or explanation. This source comes from something deeper than your identity, your roles, or your past. You no longer live to maintain an image. You live to express an essence that's always been there, quietly waiting. While you were busy striving, proving, and simply getting through, something deeper was waiting for you. To stop circling the same distractions, and eventually you did. You released what no longer served you. You made new choices. You stepped forward. And in doing so, often without even realizing it, you began to rise, not as a trophy to win, but as a natural result of choosing honesty over habit, of staying aligned with your truth even when silence was harder than noise, even when it would have been easier to turn back. That old version of you no longer drives your life. In its place stands someone more grounded, more steady, someone more aligned with who you truly are. From this space of authenticity, a new phase begins, not one shaped by reaction, but by intention. You stop chasing validation because you've reconnected with your worth, intrinsic, unshaken, simply by being. You stop searching for belonging because you've remembered that home was always within. Life no longer feels like a race. It unfolds at its own pace, not because everything has fallen into place, but because you've stopped resisting what hasn't. You meet each moment not with resignation, but with a kind of peace that comes from accepting the now. Your days stop repeating the same patterns. They begin to reflect the new energy you live from. Every word, every glance, every action carries the quiet strength of someone rooted in their center. And though you may not see it, this energy makes a difference. It leaves an invisible mark. A soul that has outgrown its old patterns doesn't need grand gestures to bring change. Just being, fully and honestly, is enough. This quiet presence is healing. It's a subtle reminder that living in alignment is not just possible, it's powerful. You show that healing isn't a fantasy, that letting go doesn't mean forgetting, that growing doesn't mean discarding the past, it means honoring it. Because every step you've taken brought you to now. And in this now, your energy speaks louder than words, and the world responds. If something in this message resonates with you, it's not by chance. Your soul already knew. It was simply waiting for you to remember who you are, because transformation is not the end of a story, it's the beginning, a beginning that invites you back to yourself, without fear, without pretense, without heaviness. Carl Jung once said, "Enlightenment doesn't come by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." There's deep truth in that, a truth many avoid for a lifetime. Because acknowledging the shadow, your own darkness, is one of the most honest and difficult steps you can take. It's not just a poetic phrase, it's the real, often uncomfortable process of letting go of who you thought you were and meeting the parts you've hidden, denied, or forgotten. Yet if you're hearing these words, it's because something in you has already changed. You crossed a threshold. You've stopped avoiding what's uncomfortable. You've chosen to look inward, to face the memories, the habits, and the pain that once held you captive. That choice isn't small. It's the start of true change. Your shadow isn't something to fight or erase. It isn't your enemy. It's a part of you that has waited quietly, patiently, for your understanding, for your acceptance. To make the darkness conscious is to see it, name it, and welcome it into the whole. And when you do, something unexpected happens. The parts of you that once felt broken become your deepest insight. The pain becomes a teacher, the fear becomes direction, the confusion a gateway to clarity. You've walked this road, you've looked at your shadow and said, "I see you. I know you're there, and I'm willing to listen." That takes courage, that takes presence, and it's a path many never take, but you did. You turned your shadow into a bridge instead of a burden, and now you walk the world with more steadiness, with more truth, with more depth. If this space has been part of that journey, if these words have echoed something old and true within you, know this: you're not walking alone. You're part of something larger, a movement that isn't about labels or time. It's a shared awakening, a collective return to what's real. Others are walking this path too, letting go of illusion, choosing presence over perfection, wholeness over avoidance. So if your heart feels called to keep going, to keep shedding what's false and standing in what's real, stay with us. Keep walking. Because every step you take inward creates ripples outward. Every time you choose truth over comfort, awareness over avoidance, something changes. Light doesn't have to be forced. It emerges when we stop hiding. You are not the person you once were, and you are not walking this alone. If any part of this message touched a truth inside you, stay close. This space was created for people like you, for souls ready to live with more clarity, presence, and meaning. So if you haven't yet, take a moment to subscribe, not just to a channel, but to a path, a way of being, because each video, each reflection, each moment we share here is designed to support that journey and remind you of the truth you already carry. Subscribe, and let's keep walking together.